Good morning, guys, or good afternoon, whether you're joining me from the present or the future. Welcome back to another FutureFight Vanguard video. Today we're going to be continuing on with our FutureFight series of the Vanity, Dragons Vanity, I think it is, or Vanity Dragon, something like that. But we are going to be continuing on with the future fights of V-EB12 today with the Vanquisher deck. So we have the Vanquisher deck and then the Revon deck as well that will come out on Friday. So happy Wednesday to everyone. I hope you guys are staying safe in quarantine, staying 6 feet apart, and card fighting your heart out or something like that. I was trying to rhyme, but it didn't really work out. But yeah, we're going to be doing the Vanquisher deck today. The Vanquisher deck is focused on, obviously, it's one of the most popular decks in the format, if not the most popular deck in the format. I think many of you, if not all of you, have heard of it by now. It's probably the best deck in the format, in my opinion, right now. It just allows you to field control your opponent by terms of binding their cards. And then we have a new Vanquisher, which gives power to your front row for cards that you've bound of your opponents that turn. So it's just very, very good. It can actually like proc if you have one grade 3 in the soul and then you just use Vanquisher skill and they have one front row. So you can even proc it off of your own rear guards. So binding your own rear guards is also, you know, a thing. So you don't always have to play into your opponent playing a board. Like, your opponent can play no board and the deck can still work. So that's like a big change as opposed to the old Narukami deck, whereas if your opponent like plays a clan that can get rid of their units or they don't really have as many units on the board, like, it hurts you. Like, it still hurts you in Vanquisher, but you can definitely play around it. So let's get right into it. But before we do, if you guys haven't already, be sure to subscribe and click the bell button down below so that you don't have to miss any future content from me. Also, be sure to click the like button. Leave a comment down below letting me know what you thought of the deck or your opinions on the deck. Maybe you have your personal list of Narukami and you would like to help out people as well, because after all, that is the point of our future fights, to get people familiar with the decks and kind of learn what they do and get a little build for them to get started off with. Also, if you guys are interested in anime, animation, or video games, be sure to check out our second channel down in the link below, Let's Plays Animes. Also, be sure to check out our sponsor, Vision. They've been hosting a lot of online tournaments, and they are having a team tournament this weekend through Cardfight area. So definitely, if you guys are interested in that and your BCS got canceled for team tournaments and you were really upset that you couldn't play in team tournaments, because I've seen a lot of people upset about it, definitely check out the Vision tournament. So that you guys can try to recreate playing in a team regionals at least. It should be a very, very fun event. And I think that's it. Last but not least, be sure to check out the join button down below next to the subscribe button if you guys are big fans and you guys want to help the channel out a little bit more and get some additional perks such as coaching and all that personal stuff, personal deck advice and lists and stuff like that. But let's get right into it. So, boom. Today, we're talking about Narukami Vanquisher, like I said. So, obviously, like I shortly covered, like, this deck is mainly about binding your opponent's cards. This deck gets a lot of advantage just because of the natural way of progression that the deck works. You get a lot of plussing for all your abilities in this deck, and it just ramps up really fast against your opponent and gets really hard for your opponent to deal with. But let's start off with our grade 3s. So we have 4 Dragonic Vanquisher, the man, the myth, the legend himself, the Lord of Lightning. So he has 2 Vanguard abilities. The first one is the continuous Vanguard ability that says, during your turn, if a total of 3 or more of any player's cards were bound this turn, all of your front row units get plus 10,000. So that's like a really good thing that it says any player's cards. Like I said before, it allows you to play into your own deck rather than playing off of your opponent. Like, some decks where you have to play off of your opponent become quote-unquote bad or not as good because of counterplay that your opponent can provide to you. So by not playing cards or not giving you damage or whatever, like, this deck like kind of gets around all of that. Like, it's counterblast 1, its secondary skill is only counterblast 1, so you can just pop off from even just having 1 counterblast. So damage starving them doesn't really work as well as you think, and yeah, just you can play into your own cards and kind of just bind your own things. But yeah, its secondary skill is activation skill once per turn during the main phase. You can counterboss 1, choose one of any player's rear guards in the front row and bind it. And then if your soul is a grade 3 card, you and your opponent choose cards from their hand and bind it. Choose 1 card from their hand and bind it. So this is very good because even if they don't play units, like I said, it rips cards out of their hand and makes them bind it. Now, this might seem you know, like, it's not as good because it's like people say, oh, it's just one card or whatever. Like, just one card can be the difference between a win and a loss. So it's very, very good. And then the fact that they bind it and they never get it back, it's not like old Nubatama where they would bind the card and then at the end phase they get it back. Like, they lose that card forever, period. So especially if they have a front row, you can bind their front row and then make them bind a card from their hand, and they just lost 2 cards for counter boss 1, and then you're about to make them lose a lot more cards because that is going to automatically trigger your first ability of giving plus 10k to the front row. So moving on, we have our backup grade 3, which is 4 Jaggy Shot Dragoon. Jaggy Shot Dragoon is an amazing rear guard. I don't really like it on the Vanguard. It's not really meant to be on the Vanguard. But if you do happen to ride it as a backup ride to your Vanguard, it can do some things on your Vanguard, just not as much as Vanquisher can. But let's get into that. So it has a Vanguard rearguard ability that says when it attacks a Vanguard, you can bind a card from your hand, choose one of your opponent's front row rearguards, bind it, and then if your opponent's front row has no rearguards, you draw a card. So this is one of the cards in the deck that allows you to just plus so much in combination with some of the other cards like Shatura or Bajan. So Shatura and Bajan actually call themselves from the bind zone when they are bound from your hand. So they make this card cost nothing, basically. Like, it's basically your cost is call this unit. Like, that's what just makes it so good, because it also allows multi-attacks. Like, and this is an Accel deck, so they already have multi-attacks, but when you're able to have a multi-attacking column, and then you can, you know, a swing with one column, then swing with Jaggy Shot, and then call over that rearguard that you had, and then attack again, like, you're able to attack even more times than Accel markers that you have, which is absolutely amazing. Not only does it do that, but it also binds one of your opponent's front row rearguards if they have one, so you're also, you know, controlling your opponent. And then if they just happen to not have a front row, you just bind a card, call that card if it's Shatura or Bajan, and then you still draw a card because your opponent's front row still has no rearguard. So even if they have a back row, that's another thing that that compares to the old Narukami standard deck, is that if your opponent had a back row, it actually did hurt you, because you would have things like, you know, Detonic's Drill, where they still have rearguards, so you still have to discard based off of their rearguards, whether they have a back row or not. And it was just kind of hard to always get their rearguards to the front row so that you can bind them. But this deck actually doesn't care. It just cares about your opponent's front row. So as long as you can get rid of your opponent's front row, you're good, you're clean, you're Gucci. So its secondary ability is at the end of the battle that it attacked. If you have a Vanguard that is Dragonic Vanquisher, you can put this card into the soul as the cost and draw a card. This card is amazing. So not only does it let you plus off of the first skill, but it also lets you plus off of the second skill, and it gets rid of it from the board, which can be really important because of that multi-attacking pattern that I just told you guys about. So you guys can attack with a Jaggy Shot, shove it into soul, draw a card, then attack with another Jaggy Shot, bind like a Shatura or a Bajan, call it to that spot where the old Jaggy Shot was, and boom, that's 3 attacks, and you didn't have to call over anything, so you're not wasting any resources, which is very, very, very good. Moving on to our grade 2 lineup, we have 4 Voltage Horn Dragon to start off with. So Voltage Horn Dragon's Vanguard rearguard skill is during your turn, if any card was bound during this turn, this unit gets plus 5,000 power. It's not as useful of a skill when it's on Vanguard. It only happens occasionally if you have like 2 Voltage Horn or something like that to start off with. But other than that, it doesn't really happen much. But the secondary ability is really, really good. It says when it attacks a Vanguard, counter boss 1, choose a column and bind that front row in your opponent's column, and then you can move the rearguard and the back row up to the front row of that column if you so choose. So basically this card is like Cho-Oh, where it basically doesn't have to, it doesn't target a card, so you can basically just target the circle and then still bind cards, and that gets over cards that are like cannot be targeted or stuff like that. It just really helps you clear out the front row if you're not able to do so with Dragonic Vanquisher and Jaggy Shot already. Moving on to our next grade 2, I would even say the ace of the deck, my favorite card personally in the deck, is Demonic Dragon Berserker Shatura at 4, definitely 4 if you're not running 4. What is wrong with you? So this card has 2 abilities. The first one is a rearguard ability that says when its attack hits a Vanguard, you can Soul Blast 1, draw a card, and choose one of your opponent's front row rearguards and bind it. So not only does this card allow you to draw when you hit with it, but it's also hitting for big, because after, like, let's explain the second skill first. So the second skill is when bound from your hand, during your turn, you may call this card to rearguard, and then if you call this card this way, then this card gets plus 10,000 power into the end of the turn. So, like I said, you can call it off of, you know, either Vanquisher using the second ability to its full power, so you can bind it from your hand. as your cost, or you can use it with Jaggy Shot, which I would think is the most effective use of it because of the multi-attack potential. So basically because of that, Shatura uses Soul and not a counterblast, so basically it's able to use Soul, and you just generate so much Soul in this deck just because of like Jaggy Shot, Bajan. Like, you have a couple of cards that either put themselves to Soul or they Soul charge, so your Soul is never really an issue. And then your opponent wants to sometimes take these attacks because they're just really big. Like a Shatura that gets called out on an Accel 2 circle by its skill, and you have Vanquisher active, is already a 33k attacker. So that's just a lot for your opponent to deal with a lot of the time, and a lot of time that your opponent just wants to take that attack anyways. So it turns out to be a really good multi-attacker. And then not only that, is if your opponent, I got asked this question before, so I just want to clarify this. If you hit your opponent's Vanguard with Shatura and you Soul Blast one, you can still draw a card even if your opponent does not have any rear guards in the front row. Meaning that every time that this card hits and you have a Soul, which you will, to Soul Blast, you will be drawing a card. So that is just a really good additional plus, and it really helps build your hand to a point where your opponent cannot get through your hand defenses because your hand's just so strong, and then you're clearing so much from their hand and their board. That's why this deck is one of the best decks. It's just able to control your opponent while taking a lot of things away from them at the same time. Moving on to our last grade 2 of the deck, we have 4 Spinny S Blader Dragon. So it just has a very simple ability, continuous rearguard ability during your turn. If any card was bound this turn, this unit gets plus 10,000 power. So becomes an 18k base. If you bound any single card, this can be especially good on the grade 2 turn. Let's say that you have, you know, a Spinny S Blader, and then you also have a Voltage Horn. Like, you can attack with the Voltage Horn on rearguard. Boom, counterboss 1, bind one of their cards, and then the Spinny S Blader becomes active, and you can just kind of go ham. Same thing if you have Shatura for some reason on grade 2 turn on your rearguard, and you attack and it hits, same thing. Like, even though you don't really have Shaturas on the board in the early game, this can just be very good, especially in the late game as well. This card with a Vanquisher, once again, becomes a 33k base on an Accel 2, so that's just really good number for your to hit, and you don't have to do anything but just bind a card. And it's any card is bound, so we can even bind our own card and then it becomes active. So just a very good skill all around. Moving on to our grade 1s, we have 4 Mighty Bolt Dragoon to start off with. So Mighty Bolt Dragoon is our, I'm calling it a grade 3 Surger clone. Every clan's getting one of these. They basically have a different ability for the first ability, and then they all have the same second ability. So let's talk about the skill that's different, which is the continuous rearguard circle. During your turn, if any card was bound this turn, this unit gets plus 5,000 power. So obviously really good. Most of the time it's a 13k booster or a 13k attacker if you need it to be, which can just be really solid all around, especially with Vanquisher's plus 10k to the front row. That's attacking for 23 by itself as a Mighty Bolt, and that's just very good. The second ability allows you to win plays from hand on Vanguard or rearguard circle. Look at the top 5 cards of your deck, reveal up to 1 grade 3 from among them, put into your hand, shuffle your deck, and discard a card. Now this card, unlike other decks, like, you actually have a prime discard target, so you're actually not losing card advantage when you do it. Basically, and that following thing is, if you during turn 1, if you ride Mighty Bolt Dragoon and you look at top 5 and you get a grade 3, like, let's say the perfect grade 1 turn to me is probably drawing for turn, riding Mighty Bolt Dragoon, looking at the top 5, finding a Vanquisher, getting that Vanquisher, and then you have a Rising Phoenix in your hand and you discard it. And so because of that, you're not losing advantage, because later you will use the Rising Phoenix from your rearguard. And moving on to Rising Phoenix while we're talking about it, it has a skill that when it's in the drop zone, when your opponent's rearguard is bound during our turn, then we may call this card a rearguard, and if we do call it this way, then it gets plus 3,000 power. So boom, really good, super good against retire decks like Kagero and some Shadow Paladin decks, stuff like that, because you can choose to retire Rising Phoenix, or you can put it in the front row and your opponent can attack it and stuff like that, knowing that every single time that you bind one of your opponent's cards, it'll just come back like a Phoenix. So it's just very good. Can be a really good 11k booster, 11k attacker, whatever you need it to be, and every card in this deck, like I've said countless times, can be an attacker with Vanquisher's first ability. So very good. Moving on, we have 3 Desert Gunner Bajan. So Bajan has the same ability as Shatura, which is when it's bound from the hand during our turn, we may call it to rearguard circle. Unfortunately, it doesn't get any power, unlike Shatura, but it still does come to the board as a booster or an attacker, whatever we need it to be. So it's still very good. Also, when placed, if any player's card was bound this turn, then we soul charge 1. Honestly, not as useful that we soul charge one, unless like the really good play that you can do with this card is if you soul charge one and you like, let's say you ride Vanquisher on the first turn, and then you soul charge one after a bind, and then that card is a grade 3. That is absolutely broken, because like basically there's a set in limit to Vanquisher that tries to make you have to have a grade 3 either to re-ride the next turn or just use Jaggy Shot's ability to shove it into soul. And basically it tries to make it so that you can't use Vanquisher's full ability while you're on the first turn of being on Vanquisher. Bajan, if you get really lucky and soul charge a grade 3, boom, you have full access to Vanquisher. So that's the one use that I would say is very good. But other than that, like, we build so much soul in this deck, it's never really a point where your soul is dry, I think, where you would need Bajan. So Bajan just kind of like soul charges just cuz. Also, the soul charge is mandatory. Be aware of that. If you guys are close to decking out or something like that, do not call Bajan, because Bajan will force you to soul charge one from your deck. Our final 2 grade 2s in the deck, we're running 2 Dragon Dancer Anastasia. This is one of our block cards, so we have so many cards that promote offense. We also have, you know, some additional cards that promote defense, because why not? We have the space for it. So we have the Dragon Dancer Anastasia. So its 2 abilities are, the first one is a continuous guard circle ability that says if your opponent's bind zone has 3 or more cards, this unit gets plus 5,000 shield, so it becomes a 15k block when your opponent has 3 or more cards in their bind zone, which is pretty easy to attain, I would say. Think about it, like if you use Vanquisher skill and they have a front row, you already got 2 cards out of their hand bound, or sorry, 1 card from their field and 1 card from their hand bound, so 2 total bound, and that's just already close to Anastasia's skill. And chances are, if you're using the second Vanquisher skill, you've already bound something of your opponent in the turn or in the game so far, so it should be very easy to reach this condition of having 3 bind cards in your opponent's bind zone. And then its other rearguard ability is when your other unit is attacked, Soul Blast 1, and you can move this card to guard circle. So this card can protect rear guards, this card can protect vanguards, just very good. Or you can even hold it in your hand, like if you want your boosters to be Mighty Bolt and like Rising Phoenix instead, or Bajan, like you can actually just hold Anastasia in your hand, and when she gets placed on guard circle, she will still be a 15k block, because it's just a continuous ability that's on guard circle. So as soon as she gets placed on guard circle, her skill will be seen and active to the board state, and so then she will get her +5 to guard circle, and you have a 15k block on your turn. So it's like running 2 more crits as far as defense, and that's just very good against so many decks. Then for our grade 0s, we're running 1 Harbinger Draco Kid, basically just our when rode upon draw a card starter. Like every single deck in the game has this, and then the errata that comes later is basically if you ride over this card and your opponent is grade 1 or greater, you get a quick shield. So quick shields can be useful for discarding or just having a little bit of additional shield, mainly discarding in my opinion. Like I would probably discard it for, you know, a Mighty Bolt Dragoon skill or something like that, but it just really helps. Also, if you can ride and discard the quick shield instead of a Rising Phoenix, like let's say that you have a Rising Phoenix, I wouldn't necessarily discard the Rising Phoenix from Mighty Bolt over the quick shield, just because you can discard the quick shield and then you can guard with Rising Phoenix later, being a 10k block. So obviously a 10k block is more valuable than a 5k block, and yeah, it will help you out a lot. The only time I would say keep it is in cases like when you're fighting Chrono Fang or something like that, because Chrono Fang's Guardian Restrict thing doesn't apply to quick shield, so it will still be a 5k shield regardless. But however, the Rising Phoenix is also a 5k shield to Chrono Fang, so you can still discard the quick shield basically. But for our trigger lineup, we're running 8 crit, 4 draw, and 4 heal. 4 Malevolent Jin, 2 Spark Edge Draco Kid, 2 Yellow Gem Carbuncle. You can run any of the mixed match of you want of those, and then 4 Wavering Guard Gold, which is RPG Sentinel, and then 4 Worm Toxin Eradicator Siobo. So basically, just really helps us with offense. Like we already have enough draw potential, like I said, so we are running 8 crit because we can easily keep up with 8 crit hand advantage as well. So let's load up our first Vanquisher game here. So we're actually playing against Genesis. It looks like it's the Astral Plane version of the deck. We're playing against our friend Joe. So we see the name in the chat. Our opponent rides Astria and doesn't hit us, but uses the skill, so we open up 2 Spinny S. Unfortunately for us, my opponent checks the damage trigger on the first damage, so we're not able to rush as efficiently as we like. But our opponent uses Prometheus, and then uses double Ulysses. So we guard everything except for 1 damage. He gets rid of his whole board, and that's what I was kind of talking about, is that's just very good for him to be able to do. But we do draw into a Jaggy Shot off of our Accel 2, so we're able to just play the Jaggy Shot and make good of it. So that means that next turn, guaranteed, our Vanquisher is going to be live because this Jaggy Shot's going to go to Soul. So we attack for 16, and then we attack for 17. And then basically, we Twin Drive, and then basically he checked a damage trigger, so we weren't able to hit with Vanguard or this Spinny S that's on rear guard. So he rides Uranus, uses the skill to get his Force 2s, uses an Atlas to get another Force 2. He does an Astria, gets another Atlas, gets another Force 1. And then thankfully he's not able to activate the Astral Plane off of that first turn of riding, because that would have been pretty detrimental. But he leaves us with 1 front row rear guard, so guess what? This is when we go in. So we use Vanquisher skill, make him bind one from hand. We bound a Shatura, so we call it to the board. Our front row gets plus 10k, and then we call a Voltage Horn. We also use Mighty Bolt Dragoon to discard a Rising Phoenix, which in hindsight we could have done before we used Vanquisher skill, just so that we would get that Rising Phoenix to board, but it's okay. We're still fine. So we attack with our Vanguard, and then we attack with all of our rear guards. Our opponent blocks and takes damage, a mix of things, and then our opponent goes for the Astral Plane, going for Valkyrian, dropping a grade 3, so Valkyrian has triple drive. He attacks us with Valkyrian, we no guard, and then he does check a crit, so that was the one thing that we were worried about is, you know, or the one thing that we were worried about was him double critting us, which he didn't do, so that's really good. We were able to block his Vanguard, and then we block his rear guards. Once again, we go for Vanquisher skill, binding one from his hand, and then binding one from our hand. We bind Shatura, so we call a Jaggy Shot, and then we have a Shatura in our hand. So important to note is we call a double Rising Phoenix from the drop zone because we bound a card. So important thing to note is that in order to still not minus, you can just call over your would-be Rising Phoenix. In this case, I didn't do it because I wanted it on one of my Shatura on Accel Circle, but you can do that for a non-minus, and then making sure that the next turn that you set up another Rising Phoenix play. But basically, you guys can just see this was like way too much for Joe to handle. Once he took that first damage to go to 5, and then it wasn't a damage trigger, I knew I was in there, so I was like, boom, 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 boom. Like, there's no way that my opponent can survive. Like, there's just like 33. You guys see 33, 33, 23. Vanguard was about to be attacking for 35, and then this other rearguard column was about to be attacking for 34, so it's just a lot for your opponent to handle, and that's why the deck is so good. And you guys can see, like, even guarding a an Astral Force deck, which is one of the decks that rips one of the most guards out of your hand. I never had a PG to block his Vanguard with this turn, or this game, but I did still get left with 2 15k shields, 1 10k shield, and 1 20k shield, so most likely, I'm not going to say most likely we would be able to survive if he lived, because he does have a Valkyrian in his hand, but let's say that he blew the Valkyrian for a PG or something, and we blew his entire hand, and then he lived. As long as he didn't top deck Valkyrian, we could probably still survive, just because of this amount of guard that we have in our hand. So, moving on to Vanquisher Game 2. So Vanquisher Game 2, we're playing against Nova Grappler here, which I think is automatically a bad matchup for the Nova Grappler player, because Nova Grappler relies on rear guard. So we do use our Mighty Bolt skill to check top, and then we get a Jaggy Shot. We do not have a Vanquisher right now, so that's the only thing that's holding us back from having a really good hand. So we ride Shatura, we call 2 Spinny S, we attack, and nothing hits. Basically because we had a bunch of 8Ks, so just unfortunate really there. But our opponent attacks with God Hand, discards a card, and then proceeds to check literally triple front trigger. Like, that is the most broken thing I've ever seen. Like, thank goodness I was at 1 damage because I had to take everything. So we also have to ride Jaggy Shot, which is another downside, and then we use Mighty Bolt again, and then we get a Jaggy Shot again. So we attack his rearguard for 8, he intercepts, we attack his other rearguard for 8, and then we use the Jaggy Shot skill to bind a card. We call a Shatura over it, and we don't draw because his front row is not clear. And then we attack with the other Jaggy Shot, binding a card, drawing, and then we get a crit, and then we attack him for 28, which he blocks. Then our opponent goes and rides the, or sorry, doesn't ride, but attacks us with God Hand again. And then we say that we're thinking. And this man says he wants 3 front, which is like, what? Like, bro, like, relax. But we're guarding for 42. So, and then fortunately for us, he only hits a draw trigger here. So we're able to survive all the other attacks with ease. And then we draw we have a Jaggy Shot, so we re-ride Jaggy Shot. We attack for 8 to his rear guard. And then we attack with Voltage Horn, making him bind a card. And then we attack with Jaggy Shot, calling our Rising Phoenixes, which is also a play in the battle phase that you can do. Is if you attack and you bind a card with Jaggy Shot, you can call Rising Phoenixes from your drop zone, because the skill of Rising Phoenix will be procced mid-battle phase. So as you guys can see, our opponent just dies here on this Jaggy Shot. But if our opponent was to still keep going, he still would have had to deal with a 25, a 29, and then a 16k block, all which require, you know, this requires at least 2 cards from hand block, this card requires at least 2 cards from hand block, and then this card requires 1 from hand. So this alone requires 5 cards from hand block, and he only has 4 left, and we know that one's a PG. So yeah, that was the perfect example of a game. Like, what do you do when you don't have Vanquisher? Like, you're still fine for the most part. It's just against some really powerful versions of other decks where you really need to reach Vanquisher. But for our third game, we're playing against Astral Plane again, or Astral Force Plane again. Basically the Genesis deck. We check top 5, we get a Vanquisher, which is amazing, and we're able to discard the Phoenix, so we get the ideal Wombo combo, like I said to you guys in the deck list part of the video. So we ride Voltage Horn, we play Anastasia to boost, and then we check a draw trigger, so that's really good as well, because we now have a draw PG against this deck, which is one of the most important things that you can have against the Genesis deck, in my opinion. But he goes for his, and he gets Astral Plane on first ride while we're on grade 2. So this is actually very, very dangerous for us. And our opponent is just going berserk. Our opponent's going ham. Yeah, so our opponent tried to Soul Blast 2 and do some weird stuff, but we were trying to tell him that you can only do that post-battle. But yeah. So yeah, we no guard our opponent's Vanguard. We get a heal. Unfortunately, since he's 3, we don't get it. And then he does 5 drive checks, and all 5 drive checks, he doesn't get any triggers, which is amazing for us because we're able to just no guard a lot of attacks and keep our draw PG in our hand. So we ride for Vanquisher. We bind a card in his front row, and then we attack Vanguard. We bind Voltage Horn, moving the rear guard up, and then we use Jaggy Shot, bind Shatura, call it, and then now our front row gets plus 10 because we have filled the requirement, and then basically we do healer damage as well, which puts us in a perfect scenario. Also, our opponent does not have a Valkyrian here, so we're able to easily PG the Vanguard. So as you guys can see, we're wearing down his steam very fast. Also, our heal triggers are helping a lot. So we ride a second Vanquisher. We use Vanquisher skill. Basically, we're thinking about that because we thought about the fact that he didn't have a front row. So we played a crit trigger from our hand to bind it, and then we made him bind a card from his hand, and we called a Shatura. And the important thing to note that I tried to do there is I tried to call Phoenix, and you cannot call Phoenix if it's your own card bound. You have to retire, or you have to bind your opponent's rear guard from the field. So if you don't do that, your opponent can't, or you cannot call Phoenixes as well. But we started attacking our opponent with all of our massive columns. We use Jaggy Shot to shove the soul, and then he one to passes us. We get a crit trigger, all Vanguard, easy peasy, lemon squeezy, lightning bolt McQueenie. But yeah, guys, that has been the FutureFight Vanguard video for Vanquisher. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you did, like I said in the very beginning of the video, be sure to leave a like on the video, comment down below, letting me know your thoughts of the video and what you think about it. Like, do you hate Vanquisher? Do you love Vanquisher? I'd love to know. Just put in the comments down below. But also be sure to check out our second channel, Let's Plays Animes, check out our sponsor Vision, and check out that join button if you guys want to support further. But with that being said, this has been Josh from Cardfight Empire, and I'll see you guys on our Cardfight 0 video tomorrow. Peace, guys.